Hello and welcome, dear learners, to the NPTEL course on nutritional epidemiology, a way towards a healthy life. With the Module 1, Foundation and Principles of Nutritional Epidemiology for the Chapter 9, we will be discussing about the cultural context in the nutrition research. Here, there will be an emphasis to be played for importance of culture, which makes a ground to differentiate how a nutrition research takes place. The cultural influences on the diet, the cultural sensitivity, designing culturally appropriate research, and actuation studies, which finds the base actually to give the intersections of ethics and equity and culture will be discussed. The importance of culture in food and nutrition. Food, as all we know, is no more than a biological substance. It is a profound expression of identity, heritage, and social connection. Culture dictates what is considered edible. Many times we find that culturally what is being edible is something which defines the boundary, like how the culture has evolved and how food is procured and prepared and the social context in which it is consumed. So the social context which makes the boundaries actually, so it finds that in nutrition research, understanding culture is non-negotiable. So the importance of the culture in the food and nutrition plays very important aspects, particularly for food as cultural identity, where many times we find that cultural meanings of meals makes, like from the morning to the afternoon or the evening meals, pay more to how they are being served, how they are being prepared, and in what pattern actually they are being served as. The cultural transmission has gone through centuries and it's being seen as many states, many countries, they come up with this cultural transmission which can be extended beyond the country's boundaries. The implications for research, particularly for dietary survey, may capture traditional foods and local recipes, which makes some sort of differentiation with respect to the climate, the food, and even the cultural beliefs that are being put while preparation of those foods. We find all these traditional foods, particularly in our country, where we find lot of traditions which are more imbibed to be seen with the food practices, the sharing practices, and the so-called specific local recipes. Standard food questionnaires may miss culturally specific food, which is very important, where when we have to conduct a nutrition research, the culturally specific food needs to be seen into the questionnaires and that needs to be included. Now we can see from this figure the importance of culture in food and nutrition. The food as a cultural identity, where the traditions reflect the heritage and community, where the shared values is being seen as very emphasis in some of the religion, where sharing comes with a distribution of food and even food for the poor and vulnerable people. Traditional dishes symbolizes the family history and regions where the family tree are being combined to see that there are some sort of regionalities that comes with the entire family meal or sometimes a family dinner. The religional dish actually makes a flavor actually to find that there is an inclusion of vegetarian versus non-vegetarian and even a combination to have a mix of sweet dishes. So it identifies as a cultural identity into the food. Now when we see about the cultural meaning of meals, where the social bonding is the very importance that finds to make that how culture is making meal as a way to come up with the social bonding. Rituals and celebrations for different festives and different ceremonies, as if from marriage actually to the death, and even from several occasions like from birthdays and even for other ceremonies, which puts the rituals being as in one way actually to see and identify the meanings of the meals. Hospitality and community relationship is being seen when the food is served with respect to the gestures, the manners, the etiquettes, and the sort of inclusion with respect to including the food which is being coming as an welcoming food to the people who are coming to you as a gesture, or inclusion of a people actually where you identify that people who are being coming are from different sects or even communities. The wider community connection is being also seen as a part to be included in hospitality. The relationship building is one of and very important aspect where the meal is being defined to connect with the social bonding, whether the occasion can be a ritual or a celebration or a festive or some sort of an events where the relationship are being seen as a foundation. Cultural transmission, the dietary habits transmitted via family practices. where the daily routines might be like the sharing cooking, actually where the participation is very important to be seen as something which comes as a daily routine for there, or even sharing the table actually for the dinner or for lunch for the entire family, where the family gathers over here, which states actually that how a cultural transmission is seen with respect to people actually who takes their meals with their family, or sometimes they are being alone sitting over there. Community norms where neighborhood shared meals is something which is being seen as a very respectful practice actually in India, and community connection is being seen more strongly being taken with sharing of meals. The generational knowledge which is passed from the ancestors or from your forefathers actually are being seen as a very passing symbol in terms of stating the wisdom, and which is being collected, where you try to recollect the previous memories of your parents actually to state that how the wisdom of food and the practices that they were being doing it is coming from them. Many times you might be seeing in your villages or even at your places where there were certain food practices which were coming with the community norms actually, where the community was taking more leadership actually and preparation and sharing and even identifying the different roles for the people in terms of this food and meals. Children adopt the patterns from the parents and elders. No doubt, this is like an observation which is being put into the behavioral practices, where many times the minor they comes with the parents and healthy choices of cooking, serving, and a great influence which capturing it to the children from their early childhood. Now, the major cultural influences where we've identified the traditional food system, food preparation practices, social eating patterns, and perceptions of healthy food. So, if we go in detail with about the traditional food system, which comes from most of the traditional practices which are being followed with generation to generation, which makes more and specification with respect to the tradition that they are following in terms of preparation, cooking, storing, and even serving patterns. Food preparation practices is something which may come actually more like a parboiling or sometimes a fermentative practices, soaking, sowing practices which may give some sort of an germis, or even sometimes we may find protein rich food emphasis, or even veggies, or sometimes there might be food preparation practices which comes with lesser oil or more oil, or sometimes with the dairy products. Social eating patterns, as we have discussed in the previous sections, it comes with different communities with their cultural patterns with respect to eves or festives or even some sort of an occasions. Perceptions for healthy foods are something which are even coming with respect to religion, socialness, or even cultural things, which tries to emphasis to make that what is fresh is also sometimes being seen as very healthy, or sometimes it is being seen that inclusion of the dry products actually which are being stored or being seen as safer in terms of preserving the values of nutritional consent of the food is also being seen as a major cultural influences. What do we find as a research implications for this is like the dietary assessment must consider the local cooking practices, where many times it is being seen that when the studies are ignoring this and even the food combinations, it gives a one-sided aspect in the dietary assessment, where there is a lot of flaws actually which can be collected in the nutrition research. Misclassification of dietary intake can occur if the cultural practices are ignored. So, classification of a dietary intake needs to come up with a lot of cultural practices, and it should not be ignored into this aspect. Now, we will try to focus more on the major cultural influences on diet. The traditional food system, where we find in India particularly, or in larger countries where it is more dominant with the agriculture practices and the local agricultural practical shift that is making diet pattern changed, is somewhere we have to pay importance on the traditional food systems, where we find the local staples are one of being seen as very important to identify one a country's traditional food system, and which has been seen as very rich to pave the importance of that country, and the people's habitat and their cultural beliefs also make this indigenous variety sometimes very high in terms of nutrition, where we find most of the places where the importance on cereals or even on grains, or even where sometimes the agricultural practices are shaping this pattern, make indigenous food very highly nutritious. When we identify and state that there is importance of lot of importance in our country, particularly with respect to jowar or even wheat or even rice, where sometimes we find this are coming as more a practice which are being seen from the generations which have been taken as a very traditional food practices. Now coming to the food preparation practices, where sometimes, as I stated previously, the fermentation or sprouting, drying, roasting are being seen as different practices, not only with respect to taste, but these are being taken as a technique which have more prevalent to be seen as concentrating towards the nutrition content. Example, fermentation is to be seen as more towards digestion, where sprouting is something like increasing the richness of the nutrition value, where drying is more being to seen as preservation and sustainability, and sometimes even coming with hygiene and sanitation and even for storage purpose. Roasting is something more important to see in terms of the flavor, the spices, and sometimes with the taste actually, which makes some nutrition quality in terms of content and impact for preservation. So you find all these four practices for fermentation, sprouting, drying, roasting and many other are more towards the nutritional change, and sometimes we may find the nutrition content itself is something which is very much related with the cooking practices. Now, when we are trying to understand the social eating patterns where the culture determines it, the meal frequency, sometimes we find that many of the families or many cultural practices don't allow to have meals after evening. Or sometimes the pattern of eating early in the morning are something which are more towards giving a gaining energy. So meal frequency towards like a 2 meal or 3 meals or even 4 meal, or sometimes a small in amount 5 meals also. So meal frequency and the meal timings are very important with respect to two large meals or intermittent fasting schedule, which is now gaining a more important with respect to the social eating pattern, which defines the role of malnutrition to obesity. Now, there is also gender, which is very important in food preparation, where we traditionally see or we find in family role, the major role for food preparation goes for women. And from procurement part to preparation and even for specifying with respect to the cleanliness and even identifying what are the food ingredients to be stated and to be stored, that goes more on the gender roles, particularly for harvesting to preparation and even agricultural practices. Majority of the times you find that women are playing a major role over there. Food distribution has been seen very equitable sharing in Indian food cultural practices, where the elder are being stated to be taken as first, and equitable sharing goes in times in handling as of distribution of the food, which pays more important on food distribution, where the cultural determinants are very important to be stated over here. Perceptions of healthy food comes very different, where we find at least for three examples that we are trying to take over here is of Asian, indigenous and Western, where the Asian people think that balance and harmony is something actually is trying with yin and yang, where the hot and cold foods are to be seen in terms of balance, and there where most of the time you may find if the food or the meals are being stated, you may find there are balances of both the things in terms of hot servings or even for cold foods. The indigenous people at their point are more towards the powerful or energetic food, where the traditional superfoods are more concentrated towards having more carbs and even protein, which are more in richness towards giving more energy. So you may find that they have more importance towards a superfood, where the Western and the newly developed concepts are more towards a nutrition dense food and sometimes with the freshness of the food. The clear labels and the simple ingredients are being stated to be seen as a balance along with that function and purity and freshness. The four aspects which comes as a very dietary focus differs the Western concepts of understanding of nutrient dense freshness food. Where versus with the indigenous, where we find that are more culturally driven, traditionally driven, and with the country specific are more focused towards the functional and power energy. Asians particularly are more concentrated towards compared to the other world on balancing and harmony for their body, and so they try to take food with respect to that. Now, we will try to understand the cultural sensitivity in nutritional research. Cultural sensitivity in nutrition involves recognizing and respecting cultural differences, which may be without assigning a value judgment, as sometimes we may say not labeling one culture diet is good or bad, or sometimes we are rejecting it. But there are four key principles which needs to be taken in consideration when we are trying to understand the cultural sensitivity. Respect for cultural beliefs comes as a very important, where we try to understand when we go for a cross-cultural food meals or sharing or even eating, we try to respect and we come up with the beliefs that are being followed for the culture comes as a very important way actually to develop the relationship or even to pay some sort of a courtesy actually, which makes those beliefs actually to be a part to be respected. Avoiding the cultural bias which sometimes make more reasons for us to differentiate or demean a person or to identify difference of opinion with some people actually who has certain patterns of food, or sometimes you may find that the food itself defines actually the cultural biases that people they carry on. So we should try to avoid the cultural bias and respect the cultural beliefs. After that, it is very important the language consideration, where in terms of how it is being served, what sort of names are there, in terms of identifying either the food or food component or even the ingredients, which plays very important to put many times some sort of a way that the food or sometimes the food comes with the restrictions. Sometimes it is being seen as a very demeaning way in terms of dealing with languages, how it is being connected with the food and makes more culturally sensitivity a way actually to deal with this. Cultural competence comes with those actually where sometimes where we find that if you are not able to identify and you are not able to understand the cultural competency, it is very difficult that this plays a very major role as a deterrent in nutritional research. Where the cultural sensitivity in nutrition research, where it finds that respect for cultural beliefs, where the spiritual significance and the traditional medicines and traditional properties, or we can say hot and cold properties, it acknowledges the beliefs, and where we find that cultural beliefs more pay importance to what is there being seen as sometimes very medicinal to the people who have been seen and as a practice for generations to their food. Avoiding cultural balance, as discussed, is not inherently less valuable or less healthy, but sometimes when you find that there are some way actually that you can say that this doesn't comes with my culture or diverse food practices are valuable, the traditional way of dealing is like you are making someone avoidable only on the basis of the food. So it should be more towards a traditional fermented diets actually, which tries to make the diverse food practices available. You may identify this as in symbolic in some sense when you are going for a food outside or for some ceremony or some festives, you may come across there is a lot of avoiding cultural bias. As in terms of language consideration, where for a researcher it is very important that many times the English questionnaires actually, which sometimes make very difficult for the people in vulnerable sections or even traditional ways actually who try to name for a particular food or even for languages which really don't come very closer to the depth of understanding of nutrition research, needs to be taken in consideration when you are trying to frame a questionnaire. Diet concepts may not translate directly the portion, the size, the food, the quality, the color and the ingredients. So it is very important like how you are trying to make the food particularly fit to a particular language in terms of taking its research consideration. The nuance interpretation needed when it comes with the local food being seen with respect to the local nuance or some sort of an verbatim actually, if you are trying to take with a subject to understanding in research, language plays very important role where you have to understand the nuances actually. In terms of the cultural competencies, understand the local customs. Offering food is sometimes being seen as a very good or a correct manner. Communication style in terms of direct and indirect way of dealing is like how you are putting it as when you are accepting someone's food or sharing someone's food shows that there is a way of a courtesy and some sort of an knowledge where you are trying to say that there is a good decision making, where sometimes the indirect and direct communication plays more role with the food or even the other food practices which are followed by them. Designing a culturally appropriate research where cultural humility is being seen very important. Cultural humility goes a step further than sensitivity. In the first section that we saw, the cultural sensitivity, which goes more in understanding, sharing beliefs and even practices, where cultural humility goes a step further to cultural sensitivity. Cultural humility requires researcher to engage in continuous self reflection, where the researcher himself or herself has to take an understanding that how he or she identifies, reflects with the power imbalances between the researchers and the participants. Many times you may come up that there is a sort of self-awareness that the researcher may develop, and the learning from the communities after staying with the community or getting interacted with the community, which will give more reasons for the researcher to come up with the difference in opinion. Many times you may have your own bias actually that a researcher tries to overcome, and that becomes a major reflexivity for a researcher actually to overcome it. Adaptations of research tools. Many times when you are designing the research tools, it comes more with the beliefs or sometimes with the influence of some sort of research that is being taken with the newer or the way of identifying it. Where sometimes you may find with your empirical knowledge or even exploration, you come up with lot of things actually that will give more reasons that you have to adapt the research tools, and then you have to put your sense towards understanding the cultural humility. Inclusive research designs are being seen very promising and making efforts for identifying different models actually which are coming with either a mix or even taking it purely qualitative and followed by a quantitative research design. Designing the culturally appropriate research with respect to cultural humility plays a very important role when you are taking self-awareness, where your own values, your own culture, your own upbringing, your own race or your own religion or your own cultural respectness always play a major role as a researcher, where the researcher needs to acknowledge their own cultural background and potential biases. There where we are trying to identify that if you are able to get this in terms where you are identifying your own self image, that how my self awareness will be seen something as an obstacle or a deterrent to my own research. Also, there is learning from the communities where we find that communities comes with expertise. Community comes with resource people. Communities comes with a knowledge which is being shared from generation and generation or being given passed to the next generations with the same level of expertise or sometimes more imbibed with the humility aspect. So community members are viewed as experts of their own cultural practices, and we need to understand the communities or we need to learn from the communities. Adaptation of research tools plays more important at how the dietary assessment tools should be culturally adapted, where the questionnaires or even your tools translated food frequency questionnaire or sometimes they need to be translated food frequency with respect to the modification of the food or even the models of cultural dishes or even the digital tabs with the local choices and even adapting the local languages, which is very important when you are developing the research tools, where your percentage in terms of measuring or amount or quality or inclusion with respect to the food that are being mixed or being served are being also very important. Inclusiveness in the research design as discussed needs to add more with the methods that should adopt the literacy level. Language diversity is very important, and local communication styles which gives more important not only to literacy but what sort of knowledge in depth the person has and how diverse text that can be seen in terms of when you are translating it or you are making language as a very strong source of understanding the research foundation. So communication plays very important understanding in terms of how it is being coming with overcoming the biases. Designing culturally appropriate research, whether practical strategies for cultural humility, building respectful and trusting partnership in community research is very important for conducting a conductive formative research before the survey, where you understand to try to go with the root cause of taking the local context, then the normal values and the trust. Whether diverse ideas are something which are very much welcome and which gives us an understanding of the community values and beliefs which refine the research instruments and question which identifies the relevant priorities. where when you are designing your survey, you need to have more focus towards the understanding of the food practices in terms of the traditional diets versus uncovering the food beliefs and rituals, where sometimes certain fruits or certain meals or even certain dietary products are restricted. Sharing the generational cooking knowledge is something which is sometimes has been gone with the family, and the family is focusing more on the social meanings of that. So you should try actually to focus groups to understand the food practices, where it can be a small focus group or a bigger group or sometimes a complete entire big family focus group. Engaging the local researchers or a community worker is very promising. So you should have a collaborative as equal as a partner, or sometimes you should empower local expertise or knowledge partners. Ensure that research relevance and acceptance is very important to foster the research community and to give the ownership to the researcher. Acceleration studies. Acceleration studies is the process by which a marginalized or immigrant group adopts the cultural traits of a host society. Dietary acceleration explores how diet changes post-migration. So the research methods in acceleration studies are more like acceleration scale, dietary pattern comparisons, and longitudinal migrant cohort studies. Whether diet changes due to acceleration is like a traditional diets where it is from the original country, and slowly you have been seeing that the diet is being reduced in terms of consumption of traditional foods, where sometimes there was more emphasis to be given more on veggies and food, and sometimes with respect to the season changes or with grains. Sometimes the accelerated practice with the host country increase intake of processed food, where you find more importance for those people who have migrated, or sometimes for the fast food, or even a new generation where it is giving more importance on the high sugar or fat intake. The frozen meals has been become as a pattern actually, or sometimes the sugary cereals or frozen meals are being seen as sometimes giving importance to pizza, or even for a cocos, or even higher sugar fat intake, or even for pastries, cokes, and even for meals actually which are coming with a very fast preparation. Now, the health consciousness of acceleration, where the nutritional transition from traditional diet, which was more focused toward fresh whole food, lean grains and proteins, and sometimes we may find are lesser with sugar, more with protein and high in carbo. Accelerated food is more with a high amount of whole versus the processed food, where there is increase in intake of sugar and a very processed, or sometimes you may say a very fastly prepared food, which is shifting towards calorie dense and low nutrient food. Increased obesity index, or sometimes you may find the obesity risk which is increasing, is post time or time to time, where the calorie surplus and reduced physical activity is giving more reasons to increase the obesity. Higher rates of diabetes is being seen with respect to the type 2 diabetes and its associated complication, more because more of the home versus host country. At the home country it is being seen very lesser, and the host country where you have migrated is more in terms of double or even increasing in a higher. Cardiovascular diseases, increased risk of high blood pressure, cholesterol and heart disease are being seen more in the generations actually who are taking more fast food or even sugar food. Heart risk markers are also being seen very much with respect to the food acceleration. Religious and taboo consideration. Religion is a major driver for cultural food practices, where research protocols and dietary intervention must strictly adhere to this rule. Where Hinduism follow more vegetarian food and avoiding of beef, where the Islam has halal dietary laws and avoid of pork, and fasting during Ramadan, which makes them more concerned towards the purity part. Christianity emphasizes more on fasting traditions during the Lent, and the Buddhism is vegetarian practices in some traditions where it has been seen very noble to be. Understanding the food taboos, where cultural beliefs of tradition, where the avoidance of certain food based on deeply held societal norms, where traditions are being as one of the reason and identity, where the tradition comes with more connect with religion and identity and shared norms, where the health perception which is being seen with the current and the modern time is more towards the traditional medicine and modern warning, which is making whole lot of health perception towards certain food, where specific long term health issues or based on the traditions and misinformation the food are being coming with the category of health perceptions. Pregnancy related beliefs, where sometimes safe delivery or healthy baby or pregnancy related fruits, foods, and even connection of the traditional wisdom is many times being ignored or sometimes the food avoidance during pregnancy to ensure the safety of a mother has been seen that if you are trying to consume more food, there will be more increase in weight and there will be complications in the pregnancy. Or sometimes certain foods are like, for example, in India, there is particularly being seen as if you are eating more papaya, it may give more heat actually, and that can be a reason actually for abortion, which is a deeply rooted food taboo that comes, and there are different practices across the world which are giving this understanding. Religions and taboo consideration coming with respect to religious dietary restriction, avoiding scheduling surveys during the fasting food, and ensuring dietary assessment tools including the permitted foods. Now the intersection comes with what are the ethical consideration that needs to be understood. Respect for cultural tradition, no doubt actually it acknowledges and value the local dietary consumptions and foods. Protect of community dignity, which engages the community as respectful partners, and avoid helicopter research actually, which is sometimes being seen very disaster. Ethical consent is very important when you are trying to conduct a research. Ensure the informed consent, voluntary and culturally appropriate consent, which makes the participants actually to get engaged. Equity and considerations are very important. Ignoring culture may lead to misinterpretation of dietary behavior, which may give a non-inclusive lens to your research. Ineffective public health interventions recommend fail to connect and have a very limited impact, where sometimes you are trying to do a research, but if it is not coming with any intervention, it is like a failure where your quality part is exceptionally missed. Health disparities are coming with inequities in health status, which persist for marginalized population, and majority of the population is sometimes being coming with an equal lens. Now for intersection of ethics, equity and culture, the cultural justice in nutritional policy is very important, and the recommendations are more towards affordable followed by culturally acceptable and accessible to diverse population, which needs to be the base and foundation of this, where the accessibility plays a major roles for the diverse population to be seen when you have to balance the ethics, equity and cultural aspect. Community-based participation research, the CBPR, is having a gold standard for culturally appropriate nutrition research, and a collaborative approach should involve community members to come equally and participate and to pay more importance to the research process. Advantage is very important where the cultural relevance of studies will come, enhancing the trust and participation, and procedures where interventions in communities are more likely to adopt, which gives more importance to the advantage or significance of this nutrition research. Community-based practices are being seen where community participation in research design, shared decision making, mutual benefits for researchers and community, and sometimes a long-term collaboration which can give you a long way ahead for that part. Examples in nutrition research is like community advisory boards, where the local insights, respective community needs, and guidance are all being seen, and ongoing partnership for research guidance, where sometimes the market survey or you may find a dietary assessment or a feasibility study are being conducted for jointly designing and implementing a data collection. Co-design of nutritional interventions comes with identifying the problem or co-create solution, where you find a co-create solution more coming with the identity problem, implementing together, or sometimes it is jointly developing an effective sustainable nutritional programs, which is a need for a culturally diverse country like India. Now at the end, whether we find in the summary that a cultural identities plays a critical role in shaping the dietary behavior, food choices and eating pattern. And when we are recognizing cultural diversity with respect to religious beliefs or social norms or a food taboo influence, it helps the researcher to design more accurate and a dietary assessment where the culturally appropriate nutrition is very important. Incorporating cultural sensitivity and humility in research improves the participant trust and data quality. The approaches for the research such as acceleration studies and community-based participation helps to understand the changing dietary patterns and ensure the community engagement. So overall, we try to see the integrating cultural context in the nutrition research, which promotes the ethics, equity and the effectiveness in public health strategies. With this, we come into this chapter where we have identified that these references may be very helpful for you to understand the nutritional research in depth, where the community participation and community role plays a very important role over there. With this, we come into this chapter, and thank you for the patience listening.